Okay, everybody, here we go. This is the first of a couple of different narrative literary terms presentations for which you will need to listen carefully and take notes. You're going to use a 2-column note system. On the left-hand column, you're going to write each word and its definition. And then on the right-hand column, you can write an example title or an example character from a story that you know, or you can write an example that I give in my commentary. Anytime you need to pause so that you can get something written down, feel free to do that. And if you miss anything, please make sure that you ask me about it. Here we go. Okay, the first literary term that you need to know for narrative is audience. The audience is who the author is writing for. In other words, who the author is trying to reach with their story or their article. An article about space exploration is going to appeal to a scientist, where an article about quilting is going to appeal to an artist. Those are nonfiction examples, and of course there are fiction examples as well. J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter for young teenagers and older teenagers and adults who love being teenagers. Herman Melville wrote Moby Dick for stuffy people who really, really like lots and lots of words. So who the audience is determined by the author as they are writing the story. Okay, plot, of course, is the most important thing of the story, because without a plot, you wouldn't have a story at all. The plot is the events of the story. If you look at the diagram down on the left-hand side, that would be a really good thing to write in your right-hand column. The plot is like a map or a set of directions pointing you from the beginning through the middle and to the end. Every plot has a beginning or setup called the exposition. Then it has all of the action that leads up to the climax, which of course is the high point of the story. Then there are the events that wrap up all the loose ends, which is the falling action, and then the denouement, which is the end or conclusion of the story. All right, setting. Setting is where the story takes place, but it's not just the where. The setting also includes the time. Is it set in the past, the present, or the future? Is it set in a very specific year or an era? The place can be as simple as a park or a house, or it can be as complicated as the city of London or the surface of Mars. The environment is also an important part of the setting, and the culture. Environment, of course, being what's actually happening in the physical place, and then the culture can include not only who the people are in the story, but what the expectations are. For example, a story set in the 1800s would treat women very differently than a story set in today's world. Culture also affects how the characters react to what's happening in the story. So remember, it is not just the place, it's also the time or era, the environment, and then the culture, which includes the expectations that the characters have. Okay, the characters, who I just talked about, are the people, or sometimes they're the creatures who act like people, who move the story along through the plot. You cannot have a story without characters, because they're the ones who make everything happen. And when it comes to characters, there are several different words that you need to know. First of all, you need to know that there are protagonists and antagonists in every story. Okay, everybody usually says that the protagonist is the hero of the story, but that's not true. The protagonist is the main character. The protagonist is the character who moves the story along. Everything that happens in the story happens because the protagonist is working towards a goal. Then there are the antagonists. The antagonists are the ones who are trying to stop the protagonist from reaching their goals. So they're trying to stop the forward action of the story. Okay? The protagonist creates the goals, and the antagonist creates the conflict that's trying to keep the protagonist from getting to those goals. And you can see some examples, spy versus spy right there, of course, and of course Harry Potter and Voldemort, the ultimate protagonist and antagonist, who also just happen to be the hero and the villain. The next thing that you need to know about characters is that there are flat characters and there are round characters. Flat characters are exactly what they sound like. They're flat. They only have one quality or characteristic, and they just stay that way through the entire story. Round characters, on the other hand, are three-dimensional. They have lots of different aspects to them. Round characters are able to change and grow throughout the course of the story. Using our examples from the protagonist and antagonist, Harry Potter is a very round character. He changes and grows throughout all of the Harry Potter stories and ultimately becomes a very, very different grown-up than the person he was when he was a child. The other words used to describe characters are dynamic and static. Okay, dynamic characters, when something is dynamic, it means it's always moving and it's got energy and it's doing something. That's what dynamic characters are all about. They're doing something. They experience a significant change. Like Harry Potter, they become a completely different person by the end of their story than they were at the beginning. Static characters, on the other hand, don't change and grow through the plot. So if you're comparing the whole flat, round, dynamic, static, flat characters are almost always static characters. They're very one-dimensional, they're very plain, they're very simple, and they don't really change from one moment to the next or from the beginning of the story to the end. Whereas round characters are often the dynamic characters of the story. We know more about them and they have more going on, so they have more opportunities to grow and to change and things like that. Okay, there are two more terms that you need to know when you're thinking about characters. The first one is characterization. Characterization is how we get to know the character. It's how the author introduces us to and develops that character throughout the text. And there are two different kinds of characterization. Direct characterization, is when the author just simply tells the audience what the character is like. The old lady down the street was mean and she hated children. That would be a direct characterization. Indirect characterization, on the other hand, is when the author shows the audience what the character is like. And the author can do that through the way the character talks, the way the character acts, the way other characters act towards that character. Using our same mean old lady example, if the text said, "The lady who lives at the end of our street is really, really horrible. I saw her kick a dog once, and every time I walk by her house, she yells at me to get off of her property." That would be an example of indirect characterization. We know by the character's actions, the fact that she kicks little puppies and that she yells at small children means that she's a mean, mean person who doesn't like kids, or dogs for that matter. And the last word that you need to know associated with characters and characterization is motivation. Motivation is the reason why a character does what he or she does. Often that motivation is directly related to the character's goals, or in the case of the antagonist, related to stopping the protagonist from reaching their goals. Motivations can be internal, which means that the character gets their motivation from something inside themselves, or motivations can be external. There is something else that is driving this character to reach his or her goals. What you're looking at here is a picture of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It looks like a pyramid because the needs at the bottom are the most important, and they're the base for all of the other needs. And whether we're talking about a fictional character or a real person, what the character needs is often what leads them towards their goals, and therefore is the reason behind their motivation. Remember, if you missed any of the information, make sure that you talk to me about it or go back and take another look at what you've seen today. Also, make sure that you've done your 2-column notes with your each term and its definition written on the left-hand side, and a picture or an example or a description written on the right-hand side of your 2-column notes. When you're finished watching this, please let me know so that I can take a look and make sure that you've gotten all of the information that you need. Showing me these 2-column notes is a classwork assignment for you for today, so make sure you check in with me before you finish up.